Welcome to Camp Confidential, Beyond the Bars. I'm Katrina McLaren, and with my co-host Cheryl Womack, author, entrepreneur and philanthropist, we tell it like it is. In Season 1, we take you inside the walls of a women's federal prison camp. From pre-sentencing to navigating daily life behind bars, we offer practical advice, survival strategies and insights that no one tells you before you go in. No sugarcoating, no cliches. This podcast is for information and entertainment purposes only. Be sure to do your own research and consult a professional. Today's episode is called The Race Divide and is based off the book How to Go to Camp, Surviving in a Women's Federal Prison by the Cheryl Womack, available on Amazon. Cheryl, how noticeable was the racial divide in the prison camp?
A racial divide between the varieties of different races that were there is very evident, extremely evident. When I came in, I think I told you that I spoke to a gal that my attorney put me with to tell me what to expect when I go and what it would be like there. And she basically let me know that she'd talk to the girls that she knew in there and they'd be looking out for me. They weren't. And as time went on, I understood this more. What I didn't understand is my maiden name is Arocha and I'm Hispanic, and I've always been Hispanic. My dad's from Panama, and forever it seemed like everybody wondered if I was Mexican. And suddenly I'm a very white person for prison. Every time I put Hispanic down in all my paperwork, the prison system kept changing it to Caucasian, which to me was why. It was very strange. Now I realize because the prison system, before you even get into prison, classifies you and starts setting you up by race. Now, chances are they have a good learning curve over knowing that's a smarter thing to do. They've had experience with it. It's easier to put like-kinded race with like-kinded race. I know I hadn't thought about it. I just thought you're going to go in and be amongst the others, and that's the way it's going to be. I mean, I went to a high school that was 50-50 black and white, and, it didn't bother me what we were in, but when I went into prison, very much became obvious. And I started running Big Sisters. The black intake girl, if she brought in black inmates, would come down to find a black woman, even though Big Sisters was supposed to go meet her to bring the black girls into the prison. Then I could go see them and see how I could help them. But I couldn't go up and help them come in because they needed to meet a black person. If they were Native American Indians, the same thing happened with that. Hispanic women, it happened like that. What I learned quickly is I got told about the white women, but the white women they just seemed like stuck up snobs, and they were all in the clique just like you'd have in junior high. And they all walked in together and went to everywhere they went together, but they didn't talk to you, especially if you were new. You just got looked up one side and down the other, like you were, even though I knew they'd been told about me and knew I was coming. It didn't happen. So that was a very strange experience to come in and immediately feel the race divide immediately.
Well, and it's an uncomfortable subject to talk about. Everyone's very mindful of race in this day and age, and we don't want to say the wrong thing, and we want to be mindful of other people's opinions and so forth. But the cold, hard reality is that it is a fact of life in prison. Did you find that the inmates did tend to self-segregate by race, or was there a mix of friendship that crossed that racial divide, or not really?
Well, it could cross it, but they didn't cross it without criticism. Definitely, when I ran Big Sisters, if a group of, I don't know how they knew, but they might know that a group of 10 girls were coming in and 7 of them might be black, 2 of them might be Indian, 2 of them might be Hispanic. And you literally have girls in the prison come and see you and let you know they were going to need clothes or somebody for this many people. Or they might even know the sizes for a couple of them. That never happened for a white person. It never happened once for a white person to say, I'm going to need clothes for this person. But, it was a really eye-opening thing to see that embarrassed me about the white race, that they don't look out for each other. Anyway, not in prison. They don't look out for each other. It's each man for himself. And they eat together and they eat similar kinds of foods. And I'm not saying sometimes you couldn't be included in it to join them, but you were not one of them. And it was obvious you were not one of them. We had TV rooms that were divided by the black TV room and the white TV room. I don't know when that started. I don't know why it started. I guess they assumed that, or have learned over time, that black people and Hispanic people like to watch different TV programming than white. I don't know. The population was probably 50% black, which is substantially higher than the general population, and probably 30% Hispanic, and everything else, every other race was covered in the balance of the 20%.
Did you think that in that in that structure where it's such a condensed microcosm, did you feel that maybe the most predominant race was definitely the black race while you were in prison?
It always felt like they were at least 50%. Now, maybe they weren't completely 50%. Maybe they're 40%. It felt like 50%. I know that, for example, when I finally got down in an alley and I was put in one of the nicer alleys for the older and better behaved women, the teachers and town drivers and all those kind of people stayed in this alley. Then, like, there was a black girl in there who wasn't in any longer than I was. But within 6 months of coming in, we had a black counselor. And she would go see that black counselor and go into his office. And she got to go home for a long weekend to see her family for emotional rehabilitation. I mean, I'd never heard of such a thing. I would watch white girls go in and their son died or their mother passed away or something, and they wouldn't let them out for a funeral. Or you could get out for a funeral, but if you got out for a funeral, you had to have the funds to pay for guards to attend it and transportation, which they couldn't afford to do. So it didn't happen. But then I learned of that and I was just like, what? It was just very obvious. There was preferential treatment, and we had a black counselor on our side who approved all the exceptions. And then eventually, after they took away the assistant warden who had embezzled from the place, eventually we got another assistant warden. I went up to him one time in the cafeteria to ask him something, and he's like, "Don't get in my face," and backed up. And I guess I wasn't minority looking enough for him. And he was just totally, so I stood sideways and I went, "Is this good?" And every time he saw me, he'd try to run the other way. And I'd go, "No, no, I want you to come, to my entrepreneurism class. I want you to do some things for me." And he did. But I mean, if you was a black person or Hispanics, he's just, "Hey, mama, how are you?" And he just come marching down it. I cannot tell you how much that irritated me. You absolutely couldn't miss the difference in the races. You just couldn't miss it.
From his point of view and from other inmates' point of view, they saw you as a white Caucasian, definitely not Hispanic. That's how
And
you
in
were
all my
perceived.
Yes, and in all my paperwork, they put I was Caucasian. So it doesn't say Cheryl Womack Arocha, even though that was my maiden name. It just says Cheryl Womack. You're a white person. Well, my whole life I've been discriminated against being Cheryl Arocha, and you're suddenly going, "Oh no, hell no, this is bullshit. I can't believe this is happening to me. Why is this happening to me? I've been Hispanic. I've been told, I'm a minority, blah blah blah, my whole life, and now suddenly in here I'm a white person, and they're not treated very well."
You talked about a black warden, but the assistant warden before was a white woman actually who embezzled from there. So by no means is any race necessarily doing better than the others at this point in how they treat other people. But you did find that perhaps there was that sort of unspoken rule about racial interactions
Well,
between the different groups.
I will tell you that the limited knowledge I had of the white assistant warden woman was that she had very little to do with people at the camp, even though that's what she was in charge of. She rarely came to the camp. And usually, if she did, she was bringing some groups for show and tell. And then I was always told, everybody said, "You're not allowed to talk when they bring guests. You can't talk to them." And they pick people in advance to tell them what you could tell them or what you couldn't tell them. So you're given the right kind of image to whoever the guests are coming through. So when people come visit the camps, they do not remotely get to see the reality of what camp is like.
So did you ever find that racial tensions escalated into physical fights, verbal slanging matches between the different race dynamics, or not really?
Well, I think the biggest tension we had is that so I got a bunkie who is still a friend of mine who slept above me in our room, and she was Hispanic. And at first I was trying to save it for Big Sisters. I didn't want anybody in there because I needed the space to save all my inventory, but they came and they called it for her because they could get her in that alley with that. So I moved all my stuff and got it out of there. And then they didn't want me talking to her. And then as we became friends and I started talking to her about business and other things like that, they spent all their time talking behind my back saying she will not even give you the time of day when you get out of here. You can't trust her. Now, she's a
Was that
rich
her Hispanic group or an inmate or prisoner? What was it?
group of Hispanics, and they'd sit and talk Spanish in front of you. I don't speak Spanish. My dad wanted to learn English, so we never learned Spanish. And you knew and then she'd come and say, no, and she'd get mad and she'd say, "They do not want me to be friends with you." So she would often go do a lot of things with them, or she'd invite me to eat with them sometimes. And they were up in arms about it. They didn't care for it at all, but we stayed friends anyway.
So did you find that any racial groups were maybe disciplined differently compared to other racial groups? Was that an issue?
No, I really think the disciplining happened. I would say, if anything, the blacks were more outspoken, whites very quiet. And that's sort of how it was in camp. You're living with a lot more blacks in a percentage wise than you're probably typically used to. And so it was louder and more animated. Now you could get the white person who was batshit crazy and she was loud. But as a rule, I mean, even when they did their dance classes and stuff, they picked, if they had a dance program and they might had line dancing one night a week or something, they picked their songs and what they were going to have. And, they had their programs and everybody else had the other programs. It was very obvious.
So did race play a role in religious participation or faith-based participation?
For the most part, it did, because a lot of them went to that church that had the Wednesday nights and and then some of them just went to the other church thing. Not as many went to the Catholic or Lutheran programs. I will tell you, I mean, as much as I'm talking about race, I'm going to tell you that there are a couple gals in there. Like I had a gal in a math class that I still talk to this day through text, and she was a wonderful black girl. I mean, I loved this gal. I made some friends there that I thought were amazing women. It didn't matter. For me, it never mattered because I'd been discriminated against. I knew how that felt. And I went in there eyes wide open, ready to be friends with everybody. And that was stupid. And then were the white girls that I thought would help me, who never did, really stayed snobby forever and ever and wouldn't talk to me and didn't have anything to do with me. And then finally, at the end, as I became town driver and started doing some other things, they all started going, oh, we should have been nicer to you. By the time they want to be friends with you and they figure out, you're okay to be friends with, I didn't want to be their friend.
Do you think, though, that that's maybe a part of self-preservation, that you're naturally going to lean more towards people that you feel maybe more comfortable with, more safer with, and that might be people that look like you, whether that's white, black, Hispanic, Asian, whatever?
Well, in this day and age, and you're all got the same cot, you all got the same bedding, you're all wearing the same clothes. No, I don't understand that at all. I don't justify it. I don't think it's okay. I think this is a place where everybody should have been coming in going, we're all in prison. We're all doing our time. And I don't think that there should have been the discrimination with those kinds of things. I don't think there should have been the attitudes. I don't think a counselor who was black should have looked out more for black girls, whether they were more adamant about being seen. I think it's his job to equally take care of everybody, but he didn't. And I mean, those are the kinds of things that you could just watch and it just irritated you. I mean, I tried to talk to him about something, and again, until he figured out it was my husband driving a pickup truck that he wanted, he wouldn't even talk to me.
So you can only base it upon what your experience was, and that was your experience.
This is just my experience. This is, I mean, I can't tell you what had happened before me or after. This was definitely my experience. But again, I don't consider myself a racist. I just like everybody, or I may not like you. And if I don't like you, it doesn't matter what color you are, I don't like you. That was a real disappointing part for me for prison, to see how I think it's even promoted in prison as opposed to neutralized. I mean, again, I don't think you can take away from it because it is what it is, but it can be neutralized. And it wasn't.
Well, we do tend to break up society by different groups and different social dynamics, whether it's color, whether it's gender. However, we do this. We like to put people in boxes. So tell me, as a part of race, were there any support groups that addressed racial unity or diversity, such as transgender? I mean, that's its whole other minefield as well.
Well, so the thing about transgender is that became fairly new before I got there, but fairly new. And if you were a camp that had transgenders at your camp, you were the stuff. You got high marks as a camp. And we had a couple of them, and they got more funding and more attention because they were giving them the medication and the drugs for whatever to make their changes. The transgenders were, I mean, they were treated the same as us. They made the camp special so that they were treated in some ways a little bit special.
Do you think, as an inmate, that you guys ever resented the funding that was put towards someone transitioning in that way, rather than the infrastructure that benefits the whole inmate process?
Well, once you realize that part of what I think what the prison does is push as many drugs as it can to raise its budget, like an older woman, they want to give you more medicine than you really need to be on. I'm not surprised that they're pushing the medication. I don't think, as a human being, not a prisoner, I appreciated that any system would put them on a higher pedestal and make things medically available to them that might not be easily available in regular society. And I didn't think it would be something you should have a feather in your cap over. I didn't agree with that at all. I don't care if you're transgender or not. Good for you. I don't care. I don't care what you are. I care if you're suddenly getting special privileges. I don't understand that. To me, we're all in prison. Everybody's there to do time. Again, these are all my personal opinions and my perspectives. The girls would treat them different because you had a transgender come in there and the person looked like a boy. Well, they just thought, oh my gosh, we've got a guy. Well, we didn't have a guy. We had a girl who was being a guy. And now they have situations where guys decided they're girls and they come into the women's prison, but they're a guy, and girls are getting raped. And so they're trying to turn around and change some of that. At our camp, we had the luxury of private bath stalls, private stools to go into, for privacy. But it's just still not the same. I didn't understand some of the parts that happened with that.
So did the prison offer any sort of programs to help with racial harmony and or integration like that, so that there was awareness on how to deal and how to approach someone that was transgender or of a different race and a different belief system? You could be Muslim. It's different. You believe your fundamental beliefs are so very different.
No, they did not. I
That's the
mean,
short answer.
it is a short answer. The only specialized program I ever saw for anything in there was family oriented for raising kids. And they might have a night program that you could take for how to be a better, family member and be a better parent. And so they would have parenting programs, limited but parenting programs, nothing else like that. And I think those would have been really worthwhile groups and meetings to have. I mean, why not bring them all together and talk about racism? And I'm not saying they don't in some places. They just didn't in mine.
Well, I think if you're talking about rehabilitation of an inmate, and it's not necessarily for their crime as well, but rehabilitation to make people a better person, perhaps if on the outside they were a racist or were anti-gay or lesbian or whatever, that maybe those types of courses in prison would help re-educate people to rehabilitate them on the outside, that they would have a different approach. So do you think there'd be some benefit to that?
Well, I think there's a benefit to it. And I think another thing, that I'm thinking about now as we talk about it is you're living as closely with these other races as you've lived with your brothers and sisters. I mean, there's no walls, there's no closed doors. You're going in and out of the showers at the same time, and you get to see how they dress and get ready and put on their makeup and how much we are alike, as opposed to being different. And so again, I think to have had some conversations about that could have been really helpful, because I already, again, from coming from the background that I did, I already knew plenty of Black people, and it was never an issue for me. I hadn't really been around many Native Americans, but I had been around a lot of Black and a lot of Hispanic people, and it was never an issue for me. But it's a really good way for people to see we're all deep down pretty much the same. It's a really good way for you in real life to experience how alike we are. And so then to be able to get into situations where you talk amongst each other and talk about the differences in their life experience. For example, one of the original girls in the bus stop, when she sat and told me that our room cylinder blocks in our room were like the houses she grew up in the projects, I was horrified. It's the first time I knew what the inside of the project's house looked like, that they'd have cylinder blocks like this, like they have in schools. I mean, how industrial that whole and hard, how hard corners, hard surfaces, that whole life was. I didn't know that. To have had those conversations would be really good. And I mean, I made some friends with a couple of them that I still talk to every now and then, that I just, there's a gal, Kathy, in Chicago, and I'll just talk to her sometimes. And she's a sweetheart, and we would just talk.
And the other thing too is that society and the way that we are at the moment, we're all a little bit scared on what we can say because we don't want to offend anyone, and we're worried if what comes out of our mouth does offend, indirectly. So you're in this vicious cycle of, I think in some ways, never progressively moving forward because of it, because you can't have a frank and open conversation.
Well, here's I think Denzel Washington said it best in an interview that I saw at least 10 years ago. An interviewer asked him, when do you think we'll get past the racial divide? And he looked over at the interviewer and said, when people like you quit bringing it up.
There you go. Looking back, do you think that the racial divide in prison was stronger or weaker or similar to the outside world?
So much stronger. It's so strong. I mean, again, I'm not saying you can't get across those barriers yourself. And I liked more of the Hispanics and the Blacks than I liked the white girls in prison. So, I mean, I just did. I just could get along with them better. And they eventually became more open. But they still had a separate world from you. You were not part of their world. And you could tell you weren't part of their world.
Sounds like a horror story of reliving a high school experience or something from the Mean Girls.
So let's talk about the white girls. I mean, perhaps the Blacks are being like that to other Blacks. Perhaps the Native Americans are mean like that to other Native Americans. White girls are just mean. They're just mean girls. You're either in or you're out. And you could be in now and do something amongst one of them and you're out. And you would just watch those dynamics and just go, my Lord, I can't even keep up with these people and the stupid things they did. And they often were the cheerleader types who were teaching the health classes and the exercise classes. No, those were the white girls, but they didn't They taught the classes, they didn't really integrate into the classes. They were always like a step above. And I mean, from my standpoint, it would make, if I were the other races, it would make me sit there and go, well, who do you think you are? Of course, that's often what I thought. Who do you think you are? Now, there are also nice white girls in there too. I'm just talking, there's always that junior high clique that thinks they're large and in charge and are running around in their little packs. And it is absolutely that way in prison.
Do you think that's a defense mechanism maybe for a white person or Caucasian person, that they have to feel like they're more superior and close themselves off from other races and other knowledge bases because that's the way they cope? That's how their coping mechanism with being inside?
I guess not being a white person, I don't know. I mean, I hadn't thought about that, Katrina. I think that's a really good question to ponder. I mean, race is way more complicated and it's way over my pay grade. And I wish it weren't that way. I mean, I felt like I've dealt with race since, I mean, I grew up when we were still having race riots in high schools. And when I worked at the post office when I was young, and they would literally close the cities down at 8 o'clock at night. And I didn't get off work till 9. So I had to have a piece of paper from the post office saying it was okay for me to be walking the streets because we were all quarantined and we were all, we couldn't come out because of race riots. And so, I mean, I lived through that growing up, and I always hated it because I always got crosshaired with sometimes you got treated like a white person and sometimes you got treated like a Mexican. And it was to me always very irritating. And I just never understood it. It's a hard part for me, but it's really alive and thriving. And I imagine the bigger prison you're in, the more you're dealing with race issues.
For someone that's about to enter prison, it's the same fear that perhaps, are you going to be strip searched? It's the same fear of, will I feel safe? What would you say for someone entering prison if they're concerned about the racial divide and tension?
Well, I'd say if you're a white girl, you're screwed because when you go in there, nobody's going to talk to you and nobody's going to help you through anything. And I'd say if you're a Black or Hispanic, there are people who are going to come up and look out for you. And isn't that nice? Isn't it nice that somebody in your own race would come and try to ease the load and just look out for you? That was such an eye-opening experience. I'm telling you, it was probably the more startling and eye-opening thing that I dealt with while I was in prison, is seeing the race divide.
Thank you for listening to How to Go to Camp with Katrina McLaren and Cheryl Womack. For more support, check out the Women of Worth website, www.womenofworth.wow.org, where you'll find helpful resources, including Cheryl's books, Mummy Loves You Everywhere and How to Go to Camp, Surviving in a Women's Federal Prison. Whether you're preparing for the journey or supporting someone through it, remember, there's guidance, hope, and a community ready to help you navigate this path.